Hello everyone, and welcome back to Real History. I'm your host, History Professor Jared Frederick. Before we get started, we once again invite you to hit those like and subscribe buttons, leave a comment below, check out our store link in the caption section, and also feel free to visit our website where you can find all sorts of wonderful historical and educational resources. Today we are going to be examining a hidden gem of a movie that very much went under the radar when it was released in the fall of 2019, and that is Alfonso Gomez Rejon's historical epic entitled The Current War, which examines the struggles between Thomas Edison, George Westinghouse, Nikola Tesla, and a litany of other historical players. I'll say it right from the outset, I think this film is a masterpiece. But why wasn't it more widely recognized upon its release? That is a story in and of itself, and it has a lot to do with the ultimate Hollywood villain, Harvey Weinstein, who nearly destroyed this film and prevented it through his horrible and heinous actions, almost prevented this from being released. We are going to be taking a look at some of that backstory, as well as the real-life history that inspired this film. So let's go ahead and take a look right now at The Current War. I find this to be a rather majestic opening to the film. We're pulled into this world where electricity is almost as magical an entity as the man who is best known for harnessing its power. And that man is shown as somebody who is equally mysterious here in the opening.
I hope you brought your checkbooks.
And I think Edmund Morris sums up Edison's demeanor as best as anybody can in his biography, which, interestingly enough, came out the same year as this movie. And what Morris has to say about Edison is this: for all his laborious budgeting, he was cavalier about the worth of his own services. He either inflated them beyond reason or was naively amazed that any investor should offer him more than he was expected. Nor was he a good judge of men, except in selecting, by attrition, laboratory staff who could stand in his own pace of work. Optimistic and good-natured, as long as he was not crossed, he was quick to forgive associates who served him badly. Yet he had no sympathy for veteran employees who left him and fell on hard times. This earned him a reputation for ruthlessness that was justified only in the sense that anyone out of his sight was thereafter out of mind. And I think that perfectly sums up Edison's demeanor, and I really think that Benedict Cumberbatch captures the essence of that persona in this film.
This won't even reach my house.
Morgan, let me make you so rich that you will look back at this moment and wonder, why was I ever so disgustingly poor?
In these scenes, we view Edison conversing with J.P. Morgan and President Chester Arthur, but in reality, Edison only visited the White House once, and it was several years prior to this, in 1878. And what he did there is that he demonstrated his tinfoil phonograph not to President Arthur, but actually to Rutherford B. Hayes. And thus what we see here is that timelines are being merged to align with the main timeline of the current war narrative and to establish Edison's character as a force to be reckoned with in American politics and in American life as a whole.
You know what you're doing.
I always receive more by saying no. Set up the Manhattan offices and make them look professional.
I'm really glad that we see the wives of these inventors being incorporated into the story. Mary Edison was a woman of a rather sweet disposition, but she would become plagued by illness and depression as her marriage with Edison was ongoing. And from the outset, it seemed that her husband often neglected her. Even on his wedding day, it had been purported that Edison was so consumed by work in his lab following the ceremony that he kept his bride in waiting for several hours while he was further developing his stock ticker. That was apparently a story that his wife later refuted, but it was a story that lingered nonetheless. Meanwhile, we see a far more robust, both personal and professional relationship here between George and Marguerite Westinghouse, which I think is accurately reflected in this movie. And here we're introduced to the great futurist Nikola Tesla, a Croatian inventor who we see here immigrating to the United States in June 1884 when he soon after gains employment at the Machine Works on Manhattan's Lower East Side. And even at this moment, his mind is dreaming about making generators more effective. What does the future hold? And the very cool cinematic look of these dreams, I think, foreshadows the same sort of style that Christopher Nolan uses during dream sequences in Oppenheimer, which we have also analyzed here on Real History.
You ready? 3, 2.
All right, so here's how this system in 1882 New York City worked. Coal was hauled to Edison's powerhouse on Lower Manhattan's Pearl Street, and there, so-called jumbo steam-powered engines kept those generators going. And the electricity produced by those generators could then supply power for about a square mile, as is mentioned in the film. And it may not sound like much, but every big process starts with a small step, and this marks the birth of a new mode of urban illumination. So exciting times indeed.
Edison, he picked the wrong horse. His current is like a hose with a knot in it. He needs to sell 1 generator per mile.
So here's a quick and basic scientific recap. AC electricity oscillates back and forth over time while DC electricity stays constant, thereby not maintaining the momentum of its energy. Recognizing the limitations of the direct current grid, what Westinghouse decides to do is that he's going to acquire the patents for new AC transformers, and soon he would become the primary backer for Tesla, following the latter's rather troubled attempts to set out on his own. And when that happens, and when the break with Edison occurs, that is when the war of currents will begin in earnest.
So you say Westinghouse wants to hurt people?
No, I can't say that. But you can.
Edison was a real master of public relations, promotions, product placement, but there is a darker side to all of this, which I think is even more so highlighted to a broad extent in Christopher Nolan's The Prestige, which presents Edison as sort of this faceless corporate oligarch bent on destroying Tesla at any cost. But in the real world, Edison consistently disparaged or discounted Westinghouse in the media, and he mailed propaganda and pamphlets to government entities that were considering to purchase Westinghouse equipment. The list went on and on and on. And the claims of lethality of AC systems really becomes a core element of the Edison strategy.
She'll gradually lose her mobility.
I'll build her an elevator.
What your wife needs, no man can build.
We get a fine sense of Edison's torn loyalty throughout the film, as he's unable to balance the duties between father and inventor, really. When he was trying to perfect the incandescent light bulb, he became so obsessed with illumination that he would forget to eat the cold dinners that Mary sent up the Menlo Park boardwalk for him to eat late in the evenings. Suffice it to say, I think he was a very absent person. He was driven by ambition, and in some cases he was possessed by his own cult of personality. But ultimately, even his own visionary mind wouldn't be able to save his wife, who he loved, but also neglected.
Here's how it works. I build miracles, and you continue to give me as much goddamn money as I want. Oh, what? Did I squander another town? All right, what did I lose?
What a powerful line with a punch of double meaning, no less. But in actuality, Edison was at Menlo Park when Mary died at age 28 on August 9th, 1884. And reports on the cause of her death were vague even then. She had indeed suffered from neuralgia, from depression. As the film suggested, she loses her mobility to an extent, but her death certificate cited congestion of the brain as a cause, which is a rather vague indication. But additionally, the World newspaper actually suggested that she died of opioid abuse resulting from the constant pain that she was in, resulting from her affliction. So it was a tragic affair all around. But what I find interesting is the film omits the fact that Edison remarried 2 years later, and furthermore, we're only introduced to 2 of his 6 children in this movie. But I suppose for the purposes of simplifying the storyline and keeping the momentum going, it might have been a wise artistic choice.
He's still using my bulbs.
His patents are in order. You keep saying Westinghouse's current will kill people, so in lieu of evidence, why don't you provide it?
In this scene, we're briefly introduced to a man who is, frankly, worthy of a movie unto himself, and that man is Lewis Latimer. This guy was the son of enslaved parents. Latimer served in the Navy during the Civil War, went on to a very prestigious career. He modernized railroad cars. He worked for Alexander Graham Bell for a time. He helped perfect carbon filaments, created an early form of air conditioning. He translated data into other languages, and this man was a key pillar of the Edison team. And I'm very safe in saying that this man is long overdue for a new biography. I absolutely love the incorporation of this old-looking film footage here as it blends into recreated footage of a bloodied man in color film, a man who's going to be very important as the plot moves forward.
William. They killed my wife.
Major spoiler alert here, as we are now introduced to William Kemmler, who will become the first person placed in the electric chair. On March 29th, 1889, this 28-year-old brutally murdered his common-law wife, whose name was Tilly Ziegler, by decapitating her with a hatchet while he was in a drunken rage. And he would ultimately pay horribly for this gruesome crime that he commits.
You drop in here like you're from Neptune, like you got a great vision of the future. No one understands but you. You're just an immigrant.
This scene is very allegorical to the director's plight. Alfonso Gomez-Rejon had this film stripped away from him in the fall of 2017 as Harvey Weinstein and friends did a rushed editing job to get this movie into the awards circuit at the Toronto International Film Festival. And there was essentially a half-baked movie that was met with terrible reviews, and the director thought that this was the end of his movie, that it would never be released in theaters. Then to make a bad situation even worse, the sexual allegations against Weinstein came out, and the entire studio was thrown into limbo and ultimately oblivion. And for the next 2 years, Gomez-Rejon fought to get his film back, but was ultimately saved by his mentor, who was also an executive producer for this movie, none other than Martin Scorsese. And Scorsese had a final edit clause in his contract that allowed him to salvage the movie and essentially gift it back to the director so he could complete his vision for the film. So in this scene, which was filmed after Gomez-Rejon got the rights back, is a moment that is actually about the director himself fighting for what is his. He is Tesla in this scene, and the mean boss shown is undoubtedly meant to represent Harvey Weinstein. And there's talks about institutional power, you're an immigrant, what can you bring to the table, you're looking for a handout, all of these ugly cliches that were and are in the American dialect, both then and now. And in the long run, even though this film was picked up by another studio, I sense that Weinstein's now indirect involvement, the fact that he had his fingerprints on this movie, was a primary reason that this movie's chances to shine in theaters ultimately didn't reach fruition. This was a movie that I think was unjustly blackballed via guilt by association, and it made the director's life a living hell over the course of a 2 or 3 year period. And I think it's very sad because the movie made less than half of its $30 million budget at the box office, and Gomez-Rejon has not directed a major motion picture since, which I think is a damn shame.
Imagine dictation without the aid of a stenographer.
Phonographic books that will speak to blind people, reproduction of music, talking toys, clocks that will announce the time, preservation of dying languages.
I very much enjoy the fact that throughout this film, we never lose sight of how dynamic a mind that Thomas Edison has. Even though this is a movie about the War of Currents, all of his other experiments, inventions, and visions are sprinkled throughout the film. We have the talking doll, the photo camera, the electric pen, the dictaphone, motion pictures, and so much more. So it's like all these other characters and narratives being fused into the script, almost in a supplemental fashion. And they allow us not to lose sight of who this guy really is. He really is a thinker, and as is accurately reflected in the dialogue of this movie, he wants to get a minor invention out every few weeks, and he wants to get a major invention out every few months. Franklin Leonard Pope was in the process of perfecting the electrical system in New Barrington, and in the due course of that, he successfully adapted the system from steam power to hydropower. But to continuously gauge his own success, he ran a 2100 volt aerial distribution line into his basement workshop. And it was there, not in the plant, where he met his end on October 13th, 1895, when 3,000 volts of electricity went through his body. And interestingly enough, that home today is a bed and breakfast.
But 800 men will lose their livelihoods.
I will keep your workers. Will not make the same promise for your 5-day work week.
The moment when J.P. Morgan tells Westinghouse that I'll keep your workers but not their 5-day work week very much speaks to the issues that were at the heart of Gilded Age America a time when there was a vast disparity between the nation's richest and poorest, and it led to some of the greatest economic and labor upheaval that we've ever seen in this country's history. And it's a time period that still resonates into the present as we consider factors of class inequity and that sort of monetary disparity in our own era. So are we in a second Gilded Age? I most definitely think so.
Electricity will kill that man in Buffalo. I will put the Westinghouse name right out front.
You ask a question, I'll reply.
This semi-fictional character of Southwick Brown is actually a blend of real-life people. Alfred Southwick, who was an early proponent of the electric chair, and also Harold Brown, who was a writer and fellow crusader against alternating current, if you will. And there were some very strange things happening with all of these individuals. Brown actually paid street kids to collect stray dogs so he could electrocute them with alternating current in his laboratory. So there's some very strange and twisted stuff going on here. But as shown in the film, the initial thought of the electric chair in Edison's mind was one of horror. He thought that it was an act of barbarity, but then he changes his mind, believing that it could possibly be a more humane means of execution. But he's also wanting them to use alternating current so he can further paint that form of electricity as being a lethal commodity. More on this to come.
In my bad ear, it sounded extraordinary.
Edison was in fact perhaps totally deaf in one ear and hard of hearing in the other. He once said, "I have not heard a bird sing since I was 12 years old." I don't think there's any reason to doubt him on that fact, but purportedly this didn't entirely bother him, as he hated wasting time with small talk. And he could use his state of semi-deafness as a way to get out of conversation with people so he could focus more thoroughly on his work. I'll also add that a lot of these scenes where Edison is interacting with his children, Dot and Dash, in this one particular, were added as the film was being recut, as it was being resculpted after the Weinstein scandal. And one reason why more scenes with the wife and children were incorporated is that the earlier cuts of this film cast Edison as an all-out villain where you couldn't have any empathy or sympathy for his character. And I think the director made the very right move here, because Edison was not a man who was incapable of loving. He was not entirely cutthroat in all things. And I think it's important that both sides of him are shown in this film. And it may have also been a reason why the earlier version of the film was so disliked among critics. I think the map board is a wonderful artistic device to show the audience where the story is progressing geographically. Rather than merely have the name of a town pop up at the bottom, it uses a tangible prop from the movie to convey distance over time. I think this is brilliantly done. And additionally, we also get a little cameo to my hometown of Altoona, Pennsylvania, which at this moment was the largest railroading center on the face of the earth, headed by the mighty Pennsylvania Railroad. And it was also a vast facility that used a lot of Edison and Westinghouse technology. So I'm glad it gets a little bit of a shout out here for as quick as it may be.
Did you know that when I first came to this country, I worked for Mr. Edison?
I did not.
I fixed 2 of his DC generators in one night, and he called me a damn good man. Tried my own company and was deceived. Who was I? Some immigrant.
Nikola Tesla quits Edison in 1885 over a dispute that is discussed in the film regarding the improvement of Edison's motors and generators. Edison had, as he later said, jokingly offered $50,000 for Tesla to improve something that Edison himself could not. Tesla took that statement in earnest, and then he was angry when he didn't get that money that he was relying upon, because he was trying to create his own nest, to create his own company and exact his own vision. And it's a result of this miscommunication, this agitation, this competitive tension within the workplace that ultimately compels Tesla to leave. And as the film shows, he has a long and difficult journey until he finally partners with the likes of Westinghouse.
Here's what's happening. I am merging Edison Electric with some of the other ankle biters. You are out.
This wasn't so much a coup, but a merger. Morgan buys out Edison General Electric and blends it with Thomson Houston Electric to form General Electric, GE. And nor was the relationship of Edison and Morgan as permanently fractured as this film might suggest by this transaction. These were two men who still collaborated with one another. They maintained a professional relationship, I think because they recognized each other, rightfully so, as the key innovative technical and financial wizards of their time.
So what is it?
The name?
Yes, the goddamn name!
The contract just says General Electric, but I'll think of something. I can be creative too.
This sort of conversation leads to an interesting personal anecdote that I recall, and it involves a colleague of mine who, at a previous stage in their career, worked for General Electric before moving over to Westinghouse. And they said that the company cultures of more than a century ago are still kind of alive or ingrained in the companies today. Like General Electric is very Edison-like focused, I think we could say. That there's a company line, you're going to toe it, you're going to get your work done. It is perhaps holds a very, very high and demanding standard that is not to the liking of perhaps all of its employees sometime. And meanwhile, Westinghouse is more so of the mind that employees are an investment. They are going to be treated reasonably well. They will have opportunities to work through the ranks. There will be a degree of flexibility. We want to keep you on if you're talented and dedicated. And so that's just one personal anecdote. Take it for what it is, believe it or not. But I think it's very interesting how that same sort of corollary plays out as depicted in this movie.
There is a possibility you'll be putting in jeopardy the lives of 28 million people.
Mr. Westinghouse's brand of electricity is fatal.
Just to be clear, sir, any electrical current over 200 milliamperes can be deadly.
Even yours?
I find Samuel Insull to be a rather fascinating character. This was a British-born American inventor and investor. By the early 1890s, he was very much involved on the Chicago civic, business, infrastructural, industrial scene. You could definitely envision him trying to pull his weight in this sort of capacity as he is trying to get Edison the contract to be the energy supplier for the Columbian Exposition in 1893. The year prior to that, he had been appointed president of Chicago Edison, the branch of Edison's enterprises in the Midwest. And even though he does not succeed in this regard, as is depicted in the movie, this guy goes on to live an exceedingly colorful life, especially in the final years of his life when he gets into a lot of legal trouble at the beginning of the Great Depression, when he sells a whole bunch of worthless stock to friends and colleagues who he had built trust with over the years. And it leads to a 2-month-long trial where he and his fellow conspirators were taken to task for their crimes and injustice. But what happens, as is often the case with people associated with Gilded Age America, is that they're not held accountable for your crimes. If you have money, influence, and name recognition, you can do almost anything and get away with it.
Problem is, despite all the advantages of the Remington, it doesn't fix the fact that you just dampened your gunpowder.
I absolutely love these Civil War flashbacks that are scattered throughout the movie. Yeah, the material culture isn't quite the best. The uniforms are a little bit subpar in regard to their authenticity and quality. But it is such a great theme that runs throughout, because Westinghouse is depicted as this very jovial person who cares about legacy and impact, and he treats his workers with decency, but he is a fighter nonetheless, and he can roll up his sleeves and show his muscle and his mettle when he absolutely has to. And that is demonstrated with these flashbacks to his service during the Civil War. And his Civil War service is very unique because he initially served in the New York Cavalry, and he was a teenager. He was like 15 years old as he was in that service. I don't know if he actually killed somebody. I don't know if that is part of the written record. But after he is discharged from the New York Cavalry, he actually goes into the United States Navy. He serves in 2 branches during the American Civil War. What a fascinating individual. And I have no doubt that it was during his time in service to the United States Navy that he was able to empower himself, or perhaps he facilitated his knowledge or desire to know more about industry and technical skills during that time. This is such a beautiful juxtaposition as we see these different vignettes of technology being brought into conversation with each other. On one hand, you have the Ferris wheel. On the other, you have William Kemmler's death in the electric chair. Even though Kemmler's death took place about 3 years prior to the World's Fair opening, it all leads to a very important question. What are we to do with the power that technology presents us? And as we ponder social media, as we ponder artificial intelligence, I think that we today are posed with questions that are no less daunting and complicated. Do these things have the capacity to make our lives better or worse? That gets to the universal truth, the universal question that the likes of the current war poses to audience. And it is a timeless question, and it is perfectly delivered here in both a historical and cinematic sense. Fantastic stuff. This is undoubtedly my favorite part of this movie. The Chicago World's Fair, also known as the White City, was also referred to by some as the Magic City. And this very brief vignette that we see playing out here captures the magic and the majesty of that to the utmost. It makes me want to be able to time travel. If I could time travel, seeing the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893 would probably be the place that I go to. Just an amazing fusion of past and present and vision and exploring the possibility. And they recreated this largely through CGI, but there were a number of buildings in the greater London area that looked close enough to buildings that were associated with the White City. Most of the buildings that we see depicted here were actually built out of paper mache and plaster. These were not meant to be permanent structures, and I believe only one building from the fair still exists today. But in any case, I saw this movie in theaters, and seeing this sequence on the big screen was one of the closest things to a religious experience that I've ever had in a movie theater. I was completely swept away with the scenery, Max Richter's beautiful score that we have playing here in the background. This is perfect.
You know, I think the solution is to divide the cost of the fence, or you could not build a fence at all.
Although Edison and Westinghouse did not meet in person at the fair, and in fact I don't believe that they ever met in person, I think that this is a very fitting and somewhat poetic conclusion, as they are drawn to a Japanese calligrapher who is engaging in one of the most basic forms of communication imaginable, that these two titans of industry and technology and communication are drawn there. And the conversation that plays out, I think, is very endearing and revealing, because it raises questions about what are the benefits of collaboration and the public good versus monopoly, exclusion, and greed. And these issues, too, get to the heart of the sort of debates that were playing out in Gilded Age America. And I think this movie is just a perfect encapsulation of all those themes and presents it in a very digestible and modern way.
Our ideas, they are what we leave behind. And only they are what can push us forward.
Ultimately, I don't care what the critics think about this film. I think it is a masterpiece. And yes, it sometimes does play loose with the facts. It puts people in places where they weren't. It condenses things. It compacts things. But as we continuously discuss here on Real History, that is just the nature of filmmaking. I think one of the important things about the current war is that it articulates these complex, compelling and important notions about what it means to be an entrepreneur, what it means to be a visionary, the costs and the consequences and the responsibilities of what go hand in hand with all of that, and what lessons we are to take from them today. And additionally, beyond its historical and cultural merits, this movie is plainly a work of art. The cinematography, the music, the production design, it is all stitched together in the finest style of filmmaking, I think, that's conceivable. And had it not been for the horrible nature and actions and just vile personality of Harvey Weinstein, I think this movie would have received a much warmer reception by both critics and audiences alike. So my big takeaway here at the end is that this movie deserves a second look. If you haven't already seen it, you should most definitely check it out. And as always, before you do check out the movie, if you haven't seen it already, I have some recommended reading suggestions for you. The first one is The Age of Edison by Ernest Freeberg. This goes into a great deal of depth into the war of currents, the contest between Edison and Tesla in particular, and it also offers a lot of really keen insight on the World's Fair and everything that went into planning it. I also recommend a book that I mentioned earlier, and that is simply entitled Edison by Edmund Morris, who is also a very well-known biographer of Theodore Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan. The structure of this book is rather unique. It moves chronologically going backwards, but I don't think that that should be considered too daunting a thing. It's a very insightful book. It was the last book that Edmund Morris wrote before he passed away, and as I said, very timely. It came out the same year as the current war. That concludes this round of Real History. I hope we were able to provide some helpful and additional insight on this hidden gem in the form of the current war. Before you head out, if you haven't done so already, please hit that like and subscribe button. We welcome your insights on the film below, and we also, of course, invite you to check out our store, send us a donation if you are enjoying this channel, and also visit our website which features all sorts of wonderful educational, creative, and historical content for educators and people from all walks of life. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Real History, and until next time, stay curious.